Welcome back to the Best Worst Thing. This is Joshua Lewa, your host. I want to tell you a little bit about my next guest. My next guest is the Vice President for Property, Construction, and Environmental at Enterprise Holdings, a company which he's been with for almost 28 years. But beyond that role, he's simultaneously and previously held multiple positions here in St. Louis as the commissioner at the St. Louis Lambert Airport, which is a famous historical airport. If you ever get a chance to come to our flyover state, you can appreciate the history of it. He was on the National Advisory Committee on Travel and Tourism Infrastructure in D.C. under President Obama, and he also was a board member for the Airport Minority Advisory Council. He's also had past experiences on the advisory board for the St. Louis Area Food Bank, and it wouldn't surprise me if there's much more that I'm missing here, but I want to make sure that we get to him as soon as possible. I just want to give you a little background about my relationship. I've known him for 10 years. We went through Leadership St. Louis together, which was an incredible experience. I think that was 09-10. Was that right? Yes. And so it was a great experience with a whole host of people who are leaders in the St. Louis region. And Sean and I've observed him for a lot of years and gotten to know him and his family, actually, and he's an incredible person. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Management from Skidmore College. And on more of a personal note, again, our sons are the same age, and so it's nice to always get a little bit of catching up time and talk about where our kids are going, what they're going through at this stage of their lives. And I won't share the story of how I met his wife the first time, but let's just say that she's a passionate advocate for justice, and she's an amazing social worker.
Going one way is a two-way. It's the hard days that bring me back to love. Going
Welcome, Sean Fitzgerald.
Thank you. Thanks. It's good to see you. You're looking good.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Yeah. When I first took on this podcast venture I initially had a partner that I'll talk about in a later episode more, but and we joke around, we'd say we're the guys with faces for TV and voices for radio, and he was like, don't go that far. And I'm like, well, Google us.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but he didn't like that too much. But anyway, thanks, man. We've known each other for 10 years, and when we went through the program, but I think socially we've had a chance to get to know each other and kind of in a lot of different ways. And I only know you mostly, of course, I have to do research to figure out your background and snoop on your LinkedIn. But can you tell us a little bit more about your current role? What are you doing right now, and what does that look like for Enterprise Holdings?
Yeah, so I manage 5 departments for Enterprise. And so the first department is our property development and facilities department. So I have 3 directors who help advise more than 200 property managers across the U.S. that work for our subsidiaries. So their focus is locate, negotiate, design, and construct and manage our facilities. And I've got another team that I manage, our airport property team. They basically are negotiating all of our airport contracts. So St. Louis Airport example, they have a limited number of counters, so they'll go out for bid. This team will go through that entire process with our different groups to make sure that they're successful in that. Also negotiating large facilities like our new consolidated rental car facility that's being built in LA that will cost over $1 billion. So there's a lot of dollars at stake, and we have attorneys on the team, accountants on the team, and they're very specialized in what they do. I have a programming and planning team. They're the ones that help us understand how much in facilities do we need at each of our locations, how many counter positions, how many parking stalls, how many car washes do we need for our larger facilities. And then I've got our construction team that's just building, design and construction team, architects and projects specialists and engineers who are building our largest facilities. And then the final team that I have is our environmental health and safety team. And so those are the 5 departments that I manage for Enterprise, and I feel very lucky to do so.
That's great. I'm going to ask you a little bit about your past and how you got there. But before I get there, I'm kind of curious. I do a lot of, since our time with Leadership St. Louis, I've had a chance to work with organizations like Leadership and doing leadership development for college age kids, as well as some previous work in Iowa City with the Bell and Blank Center for younger kids. And I have this deep curiosity for leadership. And when I listen to everything you just described, I think that seems so overwhelming. And so I'm kind of curious from you, what's your leadership approach as you have such a huge portfolio underneath you and so many people who are underneath you? Kind of, how do you manage realistically that number of people with that much responsibility? What do you do? What's the mindset you take into that work?
Yeah, well, I have an incredible team. And it's not just me. And I rely on the folks that I work with every day to do their job and do it well. And so to me, it's a partnership. But my philosophy is I come to work every day trying to prove to those people that work for me why I am there. Like, my job is to prove to them my value. And so I begin every day trying to figure out, how am I going to bring value to my team? I don't view it as they need to bring value to me to keep their job, because you got to lead by example. So as long as every day I'm providing value and they see that I'm dialed in and I want them to be successful, then they're dialed in, they want to be successful, and hopefully they're emulating that down the line. And so if we're all just trying to every day bring it for the folks that are working for us, they see that sense of, he's proving something to me that he's worthy of my time and my dedication. And from that, I think people just dig deeper and they bring more, and so it's a lot, and you can get overwhelmed by it. And there are days and certainly recent days where it has been a tremendous amount of work, but everybody steps up. And if everybody does their part, then we're going to figure it out. And I think the last thing too is, my environmental health and safety team, they're all scientists, and so all I can bring to them is the logic and the company culture and help us make decisions where we need to. But they're the scientists. They're bringing the answers. They're bringing the data, and I need to trust them in that. And so for me, it's also about just trusting your folks and making sure that they feel trusted. But they also know that, hey, my expectation, you're going to make a mistake, and just know that I expect it and I'm okay with it. We just can't make the same mistakes over and over, right? So we're all humans. We're all trying to do the best we can. And I think that if you show that you're dedicated, they'll be dedicated too.
That's great. It's interesting the way you describe wanting to prove your value to them and not having what I would think would be the opposite dynamic in most organizations, where employees are trying to prove their value to their leadership, or it's to the upper level people in the hierarchy. And I've been a part of organizations where people are afraid of the people at top. And so it's refreshing to hear of somebody in your role whose mindset and frame of mind, whether you articulate it or not, or whether they remember that or not, that's what you bring to the job every day, which is really refreshing. I'm kind of curious about, and again, I want to get to your backstory, but one more thing, if you don't mind. All of us who in our respective roles have this evolution of developing something like that, and I'm kind of curious about how you got to that framework of saying, I want to work hard for my people and demonstrate value for my people. How did you land there?
Yeah, well, it's pretty interesting. The way that I've ended up managing these different teams, we're taking on teams that I was the new person. I'm managing you, and I really I'm starting at ground zero. But what I have is a history of success in other areas, and a history of being an operator out in the field. And everything that we do at corporate is to support those operators out at the field, so that when that customer meets us for the first time, it's the best experience possible. And they trust us. And so they come back to us over and over. And if we can't fulfill our promises to our customers and make sure when that customer meets us for the first time, that's a great experience, then it just fails. And so I'm bringing that to the table in my history. But my first team that I managed out of the gates was our airport properties and relations team. And, they're managing contracts, and I had a little bit of experience in that, but not doing it every day. And so I had to learn from them. And so understanding that you're the newbie, you don't really know all the ins and outs of what they do, the technical things that they know. You've got to bring value. You know, if that team looks at you like, oh, the boss, he doesn't know anything, right? They lose trust in you, and eventually that just doesn't work out. And so each of these departments that I've taken on, I've been given the privilege to take on, I've just started out, how do I bring value to them? They're the experts. How do I bring value to them so that they can be more and more successful? And so that's really just kind of the basis of it. And that's maybe unique to what I'm doing. The fact that, you know, I'm not an accountant, but I've got CPAs on the team. I'm not an attorney. I've got attorneys on the team. I've got engineers. I've got scientists, all these different roles that I am not degreed in. But I think, you know, it just works. And I'd like to think it's working well.
Thank you for that. You know, as I think about this, even in my respective role, I'm going to be transitioning into a new leadership role in an area I don't have experience in. And so I'm going to have to reflect on that, and then I'm going to have to run this podcast back again and really listen to that again, probably the week before my transition to make sure that I'm thinking about all those helpful reminders. All right, so I am going to switch gears a little bit here and just kind of, so that's the what of what you do now, but how did you get there? Can you talk to us a little bit about your starting point, where you're from, how you grew up, and then just your path to get to the role and the other responsibilities that you have right now?
Yeah, so, you know, I've been working for the same company for coming on 28 years. And so my career path is all within an enterprise. And much like many enterprise stories, including our president and CEO, Chrissy Taylor, is I started in a rental branch. You know, I graduated college. I'm looking for a job, and I wanted to be in something in business, and saw this training program from enterprise. And, you know, this was 1992, and the job market wasn't all that fantastic at that time. And enterprise, I'm like, enterprise. And I went to the library because that's what we did. You know, yeah. There weren't any other, there weren't any other resources, right? So right. I'm looking through all the data and trying to find articles on enterprise because I at least want to practice and have a good interview, right? You want to bring your best no matter what. And all of a sudden, it was checking my boxes. Family-owned business, never had layoffs, promote from within, growing really fast. And so, you know, I figured I'll give it a shot. You know, why not? And so, you know, I started with enterprise, and I remember my dad asking me what I did all day. And I told him, you know, I'm washing cars and I'm picking up customers and I'm learning about this business. He's like, you went to college for that? And now, you know, I'd like to think he's a pretty big fan of enterprise with how well it's going. Right. But, you know, it was about the people. You know, it wasn't the glamour in the job, because there was no glamour in the job, right? It was all about the people I worked with, and we were a family, and we were working so hard, but we were having so much fun. And we would hang out all the time. Like, it was work, it was after work, it was the weekends. I mean, we were just a family. And, you know, I just was very fortunate to have the right mentors and the right people along the way that helped me really see that this could be a career for me. And, you know, it wasn't all rosy. I had some challenges along the way with any career. And so I went through the ranks where I worked in Colorado, moved all over Colorado, from Denver to Fort Collins to Denver to Grand Junction to Denver. Then I moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, worked for operations there for a while. Then I went to San Antonio, where I was a group rental manager, where I had half the city and the airport. And that's where things really, I think, started to change for me, because enterprise was still fairly new on airports. And there was just this bubble, and it was San Antonio, where we had 13% market share, the highest market share in the country by a long shot, almost nearly double the market share of our network. And we had the highest customer satisfaction in the nation as well. 85 top box score. So 85% of our customers were saying they were completely satisfied in renting from the San Antonio airport. If they said they were somewhat satisfied, you got a 0. So it was an all or nothing score. And from there, I had a chance to apply for a position at the St. Louis at the corporate office, assistant vice president of airport operations. And so I got that job. I came here nearly 14 years ago, and I had the Western United States and Europe. And my job at that time was to develop our operations because we were still growing. So it was to help our teams with customer satisfaction, employee development, growth. So a part of that growing was opening new locations, profitability, and sales. And so, I was traveling a ton and getting to know our airport network. And that job was meant to be for 2 years. You come to St. Louis and you go back out to the field, and still trying to get back out to the field. That's probably not going to happen at this point. But during that process, we bought Alamo National. And I was asked to stay and take on the role of vice president of airport properties and relations. And that from there, it built, and departments continue to be added to my responsibilities, and I owe it all to my team, because if they weren't doing a great job, certainly no one would have confidence to give me more. So that's kind of that's the quick of the enterprise career story for Sean Fitzgerald.
I appreciate that. I think about your early days. What stood out to me is, you started like everybody else. Everybody I know who's worked for enterprise started at a branch, washing cars, taking care of customers, really learning from the ground up, and then making their way through the organization, however far they make it. I know that other people have other access points, but when you joined enterprise and you were washing cars and your dad was asking you about, so this is what the degree's for, huh, son? Did you have ambition to move up into a senior level position? Or, it sounded like a wonderful time in life. I'm just curious about where your brain and your mind was at when it came to your future at the company.
My brain at the time was, if I could make it to assistant manager in 2 years, then I would feel like, I'm worthy of continuing this career. Like I made it almost. If I get to assistant manager by 2 years, then you know what, I kind of made the cut, and let's talk about the next thing. And really fortunate for me, I made it to assistant manager in a year. I made it to branch manager in 2 years. I was the youngest area manager in our group at 4 years. And so it was the match for me. My parents are extremely hard workers. And so there was no give up in me at all at any time. And so I was the last one to leave the office. I was the first one in the office. And I loved it. I just loved everything about it. It was so hard. On your feet all day long, happy and challenging customers, all in the same thing, trying to develop new employees and motivate an entire team. And I just loved all of it. And so for me, enterprise was the perfect match for me. And it was an environment that I could thrive in. And I'm a competitive person, and it provided that competition for me, trying to sell better than the person that was with me, while all of us having to sell as well, like training each other, but kind of those lunch bets with each other. Or when I became a manager, it was, who's going to have the best growth this month. And, it would be happy hour on the other branch, so all of that just was great. It was really a perfect match for me at the time.
Thanks for sharing that. I think about, I was talking to a student at a leadership institute, and, we were talking about the value of hard work. And I kind of describe it as, I like to run. And I remember the first time I took on running for exercise. I ran about a quarter of a mile away from home, and I turned around and I knew that was it. I had to get home. Otherwise, I don't know. There was no Uber at the time. So I don't know how I was going to get home, and how just slowly but surely building up that stamina and having a value of just knowing that, you can build your stamina into hard work. And so, I think of hard work in the same way in the workplace. People think and they hear all the time that hard work is so critical for success, and it really is. There's no substitute for it. And even if you're not at that place right now, how you can build up that muscle just a little at a time, which is amazing. But something really stood out to me, which is you talked about your parents being hard workers. Can you talk to me a little bit about that background? Tell me where you're from, your folks, and kind of what their background was and their influence on you.
Yeah, so I'm going to date myself, but my parents are the Costanzas. You know, if you remember Seinfeld, and my sister and I joke that they're the Bickertons. You know, my last name is Fitzgerald, but we call them the Bickertons. So my mom is they're both from New York. My dad's from upstate New York. My mom is from New York City, and her family is from Poland and Russia, and they're Jewish, and my dad is an Irish Catholic Italian, you know.
What a combo.
And so just the clash of those two things coming together. Listen, you want to know where you stand at any time with my parents, you knew it. Like they were on it all the time. But they'd walk away from it. You know, that was probably the hardest part for my wife, Christine, is that, you know, we could have these debates and just get into it. And sometimes it even could get a little personal, and they would walk away, and then they left that alone. And the next morning be like, what do you want for breakfast? And for some people, they're still like, wait a second. Like, I didn't appreciate that last night. Right. And so, that background, my mom worked for an engineering company. She was their marketer, kind of putting together their bids for cities and municipalities, which is kind of funny that we talk about that now, because that's a big part of what I was doing, was helping our teams, making sure we're putting together bids. And my dad was an attorney, and one of his biggest clients was large leases. So leasing airlines or ships or salt mines or trains. And so, in fact, my office at work has planes all over it. And those are all from deals my dad helped the company put together, you know, leasing a plane from one company to the next. Like, one thing we don't realize is that new planes may go to Southwest, but they may then bounce to another company when those leases are up. And so there's a company that he worked with that did that. My dad didn't retire until he was 72. And my mom didn't retire until she was 68. And, you know, when you're an attorney, you know, you eat what you kill. So, you know, he was in the morning, he was out the door, and, you know, we would try to eat dinner as a family at 7:30, 7:45 at night when he got home. And, you know, so I just always saw that. And I guess that was a part of what was embedded in me, is you got to put it in. If you want something out of it, you got to put it in. And so, you know, I always had a job and was always trying to work something, but I worked for the city of Littleton all through college. You know, we were cleaning out ditches and mowing down the weeds and mowing all their medians in the different roads and different parks. And it was hard work, but, you know, again, there was nothing about that bothered me. And so, my sister's lives in the house that I grew up in, and she's back in Littleton. She owns her own business, benefits company, and you know, I close with my sister, close with my mom. Dad's, you know, from a different generation type of thing, and you know, that's kind of my background. Hopefully that hits on everything you're looking for.
It definitely does. I just had a few reflections before we get to the last segment. One of them is this idea of observing your parents do the hard work. I remember just a connecting point for us is, you know, watching my mother work a regular job and then cleaning the toilets and being a janitor at our former preschool and taking us with her. And then even in high school, she always had multiple jobs. And I remember, though, early on, my brother, especially my brother Joseph and I, we decided that we were going to hustle. So we would, you know, building owner for our apartment would have us do odd jobs, pulling weeds. Then we'd go door to door and ask people to clean their windows, and then we'd go to neighbors and the houses in the neighborhood where people actually own their property. We would ask them to mow their lawns and they'd say, sure. And then we'd say, can we use your lawnmower? Because we didn't own lawnmowers. But this ethic of observing a parent and seeing the value of her hard work and then showing that it provided food and shelter and clothing and actually sending money back as an immigrant back to Africa, to Uganda, allowed for us to really absorb that value. And I see it with my other siblings as well, but in particular, Joseph and I remember us getting paper routes early, selling candy door to door, just doing all kinds of random jobs and understanding the value of hard work. I totally connect with you. And then the other thing I'm thinking about is I had a really interesting conversation with Chancellor Wrighton as he was wrapping up his tenure at WashU, and I asked him, we were talking about careers, and I'm really ambitious. I want to be president of a college or university, so I like to say it publicly. I'm not willing to do it right now because I'm not ready to do it now, and people will be not smart for hiring me at this point. But at some point in my career, I'd love to do that. And so when I was talking to him, I asked him about, I said, I'd like to retire at age 65. And he's like, why? He's like, I'm 70. I put that as the hard limit. And he told me why, with the laws changing everything, that, even though he could still do the job, it's important to have fresh new eyes and perspectives in his role. And so his wisdom is there. But, cutting myself off at 65 when I still have a little fight in me at 70 didn't make sense. So I love the fact that your parents, between 72 and 68, I think that 70 to me sounds like a sweet spot. And
right.
So I've been, your parents are handing down and even maybe doing a little parenting for me and affirming that I'm going to be working till I'm 70. I have no ambition to retire at age 50. I like the idea of serving and giving and putting in work.
Well, I just, for me, the nice part would be to get to a point where you can if you want to, right?
Yes.
And
absolutely.
So, I'm trying to get to that point that if I can, I want to. I have no thoughts of doing that right now. The challenge is definitely ahead, and it's all hands on deck. So,
absolutely,
we got to get it done.
Well, I know that we're not that much far apart in age, so I'll be right there with you, buddy, for sure. All right, so we're gonna get to the last section of this interview. As you know, Sean, this podcast is called The Best Worst Thing. This is a time where you describe either a personal or professional setback in which you had to overcome it, and the resiliency that was a result of that. And so kind of, if you could tell us the story about the what, and then, how you got through it, and maybe some takeaways and some lessons. So it's wide open, and I want to give you the floor.
No sleep, only for the weary. Don't speak, let your dreams escape. Nothing that I can say or do can take away my pain for you. Taming the beast is not so easy now.
Yeah, so, I think that we grew up in a generation of shake it off, be a man, you can handle it, suck it up, rub some dirt on it, just like all the things that caused me to go to a place through events of, I talked about as I was stacking books on a bookshelf. And the books that I would look at every day were, my mom had cancer. My best friend just passed away from Lou Gehrig's disease. My son's middle name, John, is from Johnny Walker, spelled Jon. He passed away. My son was going to college, leaving. My buddy, spend the weekends with, I'm sure kind of the same feelings you had with your son, so there was a sense of loss there. My daughter was going through some challenges, as any young teenage daughter does. And I moved up in the company where I wasn't getting that, hey, way to go, nice job, kind of those affirmations. And I became lonely, and honestly, that loneliness turned into depression. And, there's this awesome TED Talk, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but my wife made me watch it, Christine. It's Guy Winch, and it's called I think it's called Emotional First Aid. And Guy Winch talks about that we spend so much time talking about our bodies and our health of our bodies, but we don't talk about the brain and our minds as being something that you need to work at too. And so what was happening is I wasn't equipped. I'd never been trained to handle the transitions in my life, the books that were stacked up on the bookshelf that I kept checking out all the time, grabbing that book of depression of friend passing away, grabbing that book of my son going off to college, grabbing that book of mom has cancer, grabbing that book of I'm not getting the affirmations that I was used to. And I wasn't ready for it. And I got depressed and I needed help. And it was impacting me as a person, me as a professional, me as being a good husband and father. It was impacting everything. And so those were kind of my worst moments, thinking about, life and contemplating life and thinking about just forgetting it all was kind of the depths of where I was. And the more I talk about it, the more I realize now that I'm not alone today. And I'm not alone in that experience of loneliness or just the emotional impacts that can happen to you and you're just not ready for it. Because I love my parents. I love my sister. I love my family. But no one in my lifetime was giving me the training and giving me the tools and resources to handle my response, my individual response to all those events happening. And no one can predict what's going to happen to someone when they're faced with that. And it hit me hard. And, that was my low point for sure. And it's fairly recent. I am still kind of sensitive to it. My voice gets a little shaky when I talk about it, but,
yeah.
I will tell you this. The two luckiest things that have ever happened in my life is I met Christine Shore Fitzgerald and I got to work for Enterprise. And, she just flatly, just said, you need help. You need help. And we watched this Guy Winch video and it was like he was talking to me. Like he was just basically saying like, here are all the things that can happen to you and we're not equipped to handle them. And you need to get help. You can't do it on your own. And so I reached out for help. I got professional help. And, it didn't happen overnight. You'll like Guy Winch too, because he's an identical twin. So you'll like
nice.
that too.
Yeah.
And that's probably what stuck with Christine too, because, Christine's an identical twin as well. And so I got professional help. And, I went and saw a therapist, and I'm not too proud to say that, I did that and it was what I needed to do. And I can't tell you how many people that I know that see therapists because you got to get checkups, and things happen and you just need to recheck yourself. And there are friends and family and employees that I've recommended go see therapists. And I've never, ever personally or experienced anyone who just said, that was the worst experience I've ever had. I will never go back to a therapist. They were totally unhelpful. So for me now, I understand the bad habits. And it doesn't mean that I have bad days. That's not what I'm saying. but it does mean that I'm more equipped on how to handle them. And I have resources to reach to when I'm feeling lonely, and reminding myself that I am not in this alone. No one on this planet is in it alone, unless they purposely want to be, right?
Yes.
And so, for me, Christine is the most critical person in my life. And she's really a driving force that got me to seek the help, understand that it's okay to do that. You can't just shake this off. You can't just, this isn't something that you rub some dirt on and it'll be okay. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm just so thankful. I'm just a happier person. My outlook is different. The way I respond to things is totally different. There's this inner voice in my mind that will perk up, and it's there. I haven't shut it off, but when it perks up and that negativity comes in, I'm equipped to say, check the facts. What's actually happening? Mm. What did someone actually say to you? What is the situation? And I'm just so glad that, loneliness, depression, feeling isolated, all those things are in my rearview mirror. I just know that they're not in other people's. And I can just see it. Like, I'm sure other people feel this way, but you can hide it. You can try to hide it, but the cracks will be there. People will see it. And, in sharing this story, I truly hope that other people, other men out there, proud people who just like, I'm not going to go do that. That's not what men do. Well, this man, yeah, he sees a therapist. This man, if I want to cry, I'll cry, and I think it makes me a better friend, makes me a better husband, makes me a better father. I want to show my son that emotions are okay. It's okay to have feelings, and it's okay to talk about them. So I hope that
it does, Sean. I appreciate you sharing that. It's interesting as I formulate this concept of the best worst thing, and how you've captured it in two ways by sharing this collection of things that were happening at the same time, with loss, transition, fear with family, and the counterbalance being the best thing, which is your wife and her ability to give you a resource, and for your openness to actually sit down with her and watch all of that. And I also think that your story gives both people who are maybe firing at all cylinders in their careers, but are feeling the same levels of loneliness, and maybe they just think it's a down moment, but it's depression or anything else. Maybe it can empower them to actually go and ask the questions and seek help. And then for folks who aspire for success in any field that they've listened to on this podcast, to know that people who are in these positions are real human beings who are going through the same things, and you don't get to outrun this stuff. You can't ignore it. And then finally, I want to say I appreciate you putting in the gender perspective on it, because I do think that, we grew up in a generation where you dust it off. I remember I love my mother, but, if I was crying as a kid, she would have this little song she would sing to kind of get me to stop crying, which is kind of teasing. And I think there was this culture of raising strong men who didn't deal with it. And what that effectively turned into is ulcers and early heart attacks and drinking and other things, and depression ultimately. So maybe this is a good call to empower people to, at any stage of their life, to seek the support and help and talk to somebody and be open to it. And so I appreciate you doing that and sharing that story with us.
Well, depression and anxiety, man, it's real. And when we see it festering in our kids, and I hope others understand how to recognize that, not only in your children, but in yourselves too, because they want to be you. They want to emulate you, no matter how much you may want something better for them. It just happens. And so if you're trying to overcome anxiety and depression yourself, just know that you have this person that's emulating you, and they're learning those bad habits. And, so for me, I'm just very thankful for the resources that are out there that are available for people to reach to. And, for our company, we have the EAP line that you can use, employee assistance program. And, those are all great resources to reach to. And I would just say this, as I start talking about it and I start taking these polls, it is amazing to me how many successful people, not only in my company, but in other companies. Yeah. They may call them a coach. They may call them whatever they want to call them.
That's right.
But you know what? They're getting the support that they need. They're getting the first aid that they need. They're getting the exercise that they need on their emotions and on their mind. And, I don't want to take anything away from Guy Winch, but, he's got it right. And that is that as young kids and even as adults, we're always talking about our physique and being physically strong, when being mentally strong is just as important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to give a shout out to Christine. I got a chance to meet her, and again, I won't embarrass her with telling how I met her, but let's just see that Christine is a powerhouse. She's an amazing social worker. There's no doubt that she's an amazing therapist, and she is an advocate for those who are underserved and those who are under-resourced. And I've seen it in action, and I'll just put it that way. She's a graduate of the Brown School with a master's degree in social work, and it was just so cool to connect with her after those years and to connect with you, Sean, after those years. Before we wrap up, I also want to say just my perspective of you, and this is why I'm really appreciative of this conversation. I alluded to this a little bit in our email correspondence, but during a hard time in my life, when I was going off the deep end, that I'll share at a later episode, I remember thinking back to people who I really appreciated and in their careers. And you're one of the people who stood out to me. Like, I could see you at a happy hour where you drink one beer and be like, okay, I'm going home. And I'm like, why is he doing like the rest of us, doing it, running till the wheels come off with, boozing up. And again, those behaviors are coming from a very different motivation and dark place for me. But I just observed how you behaved. And so, now the picture's full, it's well-rounded, and it's even more of an impressive story for me to see the guy who I always saw as a steady leader, a great family man, and just a good dude. I can just laugh with and have a good time, and makes a hell of a breakfast. I forgot what we had. Was it waffles? I don't remember what it was. But on top of that, who can also be real and vulnerable. And so I appreciate that, man. I think this, for me, has rounded out my perspective of you and even increased my appreciation of you as a person I've watched over the years. So thank you for being here, Sean. I appreciate it.
Well, that means a lot to me. It really does. And I appreciate being a part of this, and I wish you the very best of success.
All right. So we'll go ahead and shut down here, and we'll get back after it. See y'all next week. Thank you for listening to the Best Worst Thing podcast. I'm your host, Josh Walala. Music is produced by DJ Josh One. You can follow him at Boom Note on Instagram and Twitter, and Josh One on Spotify. The Best Worst Thing podcast is edited by Cool Jets Audio and Visual. You can find them at Cool Jets AV on Instagram. Our marketing is designed by Francesca Daniels. You can find her at FrankandKitty24 on Instagram. And our overall design is by Inspired Design with Ryan Daniels. You can find them at getinspired.design on Instagram. Please download us from iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite platform. And remember to share us with your friends, especially those people you think really need us in their life. Don't forget to give us a 5-star review. Thank you for listening to The Best Worst Thing.
The cool Cali kid from the boondocks. Bounce to your hood like Chaka with a cry line. Independent thing to play a beat, I get my rhyme on. So when I strut on a path to perfection, city to your borough, to your town, to your streets. Keep your party live, Josh One. Got beats out of nature, Grazer, Oakland, strays to Asia. It's like Fraser, force of Fantasia. Move through your suburb.